Have you ever wondered what might have happened to your life if just one person, one single human being, had looked at you differently during your darkest moments and seen not what everyone else saw, but what you could become? Well, hello there, my dear friends. Come settle in with your favorite cup of coffee or tea, perhaps in that comfortable chair where stories feel safe to unfold and memories feel ready to be shared. I'm Joe. Though at 65, I've earned the right to a few more descriptors over the years. Grandfather, retired teacher myself now, and perhaps most surprisingly to those who knew me as a young man, published author. I'm deeply grateful that you've chosen to spend part of your day here with me in this little sanctuary we've created together. You know, at my age, I've come to understand that our lives are shaped not just by the choices we make, but by the moments when someone else chooses to see possibility where the world sees only problems, potential where others see only failure, and promise where everyone else has given up hope. Today, I want to share with you a story about a woman named Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a 7th grade English teacher who looked at an angry, defiant 12-year-old kid from the wrong side of the tracks and somehow saw a future writer when absolutely no one else, including that kid himself, could see anything but trouble ahead. And it's a story about the transformative power of belief, about how one teacher's unwavering faith in a student's potential can echo across decades and change not just one life, but countless others. It's about discovering that sometimes the most profound gifts we receive come disguised as ordinary moments in overcrowded classrooms, and that the people who save us often do so not with grand gestures, but with quiet persistence, creative encouragement, and the radical act of refusing to give up on someone when everyone else already has. But more than that, it's a story about discovering that it's never too late to honor those who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. Never too late to pass on the gift of seeing potential in unexpected places. And never too late to understand that the most important education we can receive or give has very little to do with textbooks and everything to do with the human capacity to recognize and nurture the spark of possibility that exists in every person, regardless of their circumstances or their past. If these conversations we share bring you comfort during reflective moments, perhaps remind you of your own experiences with teachers who made a difference, or simply provide a gentle voice when the world feels too quick to judge and too slow to encourage, I would be deeply honored if you'd consider joining our growing family of friends here. And your presence tells me that these stories have value, that the lessons we've gathered through decades of learning, growing, and sometimes discovering magic in the most unexpected relationships can offer genuine guidance to others walking similar paths of memory and meaning. Now, let me take you back to a time that feels both like yesterday and several lifetimes ago. A sweltering September afternoon in 1970, when an angry 12-year-old boy walked into Lincoln Middle School in East Los Angeles with a chip on his shoulder the size of a city block, completely unaware that he was about to meet the woman who would quite literally save his life and change the trajectory of everything that followed. Watcher, if you will, that angry young man slouching into a classroom that smelled of chalk dust and disinfectant, his clothes slightly too small because there hadn't been money for new ones, his hair deliberately unkempt because rebellion was the only power he felt he possessed. That young man was me, and I was drowning in the kind of rage that comes from growing up too fast in circumstances that no child should have to navigate, carrying wounds that made trust feel dangerous and hope feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. The year 1970 was a time of tremendous social upheaval in America. But for our family, the upheaval was far more personal and immediate than anything happening in the broader culture. We were living in a cramped apartment in East LA, in a neighborhood where the American dream felt more like a cruel joke than an achievable goal, where every day was a struggle for survival rather than an opportunity for growth. My father, Roberto, had come to America from Mexico with hopes as big as the sky and a work ethic that could move mountains. But the reality he encountered was a series of low-paying jobs, language barriers that made advancement nearly impossible, and the constant stress of trying to provide for a family in a country that seemed determined to remind him daily that he didn't quite belong. He worked construction when there was work to be found, cleaned office buildings at night when construction jobs were scarce, and carried himself with a dignity that impressed me even as I was too young and angry to fully appreciate it. But my mother, Carmen, was trying to hold our family together while working as a seamstress in a factory downtown, taking piecework home in the evenings to earn the extra dollars that meant the difference between paying rent and facing eviction. She had been a teacher in Mexico, intelligent and well-educated, but her credentials meant nothing here, and her accented English was seen as evidence of limitations rather than proof of her bilingual capabilities. I was the eldest of 4 children, which meant that adult responsibilities found me long before I was emotionally or mentally prepared for them. While other kids my age were worried about homework and playground politics, I was translating for my parents at doctor's appointments, helping my younger siblings with their schoolwork in a language I was still struggling to master myself, and generally trying to navigate a world that seemed designed to make our family that feel unwelcome and unsuccessful. Oh, the pressure was constant and overwhelming. At home, I was expected to be the responsible oldest child, the bridge between my parents' world and American culture, the example for my younger siblings. And at school, I was just another kid from the barrio, automatically suspected of being a troublemaker, constantly watched for signs of the gang involvement that teachers seemed to assume was inevitable for boys who looked like me and came from neighborhoods like ours. By the time I reached 7th grade, the accumulated stress, anger, and frustration had crystallized into a defensive posture that kept the world at arm's length. I had learned that it was safer to be seen as tough and unapproachable than to risk being vulnerable and disappointed, and I had developed what I thought was a sophisticated understanding that adults were not to be trusted, that authority figures were more likely to punish than to help, and that the sooner I accepted that I was on my own in this world, the less likely I was to be hurt by the inevitable betrayals and disappointments. School had become a battleground where I fought daily skirmishes with teachers who saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a student to be educated. My grades were poor, not because I lacked intelligence, but because I had decided that academic success was for other people who belonged in America in ways that I never would. People whose families spoke English at the dinner table and whose fathers wore ties to work. I had been suspended twice in 6th grade for fighting, not because I was particularly aggressive by nature, but because fighting felt like the only way to maintain the respect and distance that I thought were necessary for survival. I had learned to wear my anger like armor, to project toughness even when I felt frightened and uncertain, and to push people away before they could reject me. The transition to middle school had been particularly difficult. Lincoln Middle School was larger, more impersonal, and filled with kids from neighborhoods that made mine look prosperous by comparison. And the hallways were overcrowded, the teachers were overwhelmed, and the general atmosphere was one of barely controlled chaos rather than educational opportunity. I had spent the first few weeks of 7th grade establishing my reputation as someone who wasn't interested in making friends, wasn't impressed by adult authority, and definitely wasn't going to be an easy student to manage. I sat in the back of every classroom, spoke only when directly confronted, and generally made it clear that I was physically present but emotionally and intellectually unavailable. Most of my teachers had responded to my attitude with a combination of resignation and relief. It was easier to write me off as a lost cause than to invest the energy required to break through my defenses. They had too many other students, too many other problems, and not nearly enough time or resources to waste on a kid who clearly didn't want to be helped. This dynamic suited me fine. I had decided that school was simply something to be endured until I was old enough to drop out and find work. That education was for people who had the luxury of believing in their futures, and that the sooner I accepted my limited options, the less disappointed I would be when life inevitably let me down. And then I walked into Mrs. Rodriguez's 7th grade English class on that September afternoon, and everything I thought I knew about teachers, about school, and about my own possibilities began to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. Elena Rodriguez was probably in her mid-30s then, Though to my 12-year-old perspective, she seemed both ancient in wisdom and timeless in energy. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair that she wore pulled back in a simple bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. Not in a suspicious, watchful way, but with the kind of gentle attention that made you feel like you mattered, even when you were trying very hard to convince yourself and everyone else that you didn't care about mattering at all. She wore simple dresses in colors that somehow made the dreary classroom feel warmer, and she moved around the room with a quiet confidence that was completely different from the harried, defensive energy that characterized most of the other teachers I had encountered. There was something about her presence that was both calming and energizing, as if she possessed some secret knowledge about how to find joy and meaning in circumstances that would overwhelm most people. But what struck me most about Miss Rodriguez, even in those first few minutes of that first class, was the way she looked at each student who entered her classroom. With the quick, assessing glance that most teachers used to categorize us into neat little boxes marked good student, average student, or troublemaker, but a longer and more thoughtful attention that seemed to suggest she was genuinely interested in getting to know each of us as individuals rather than simply managing us as a group. When I slouched into her classroom that first day, wearing my carefully cultivated expression of boredom and defiance, she looked at me with the same thoughtful attention she had given every other student, but there was something in her eyes, a combination of warmth and curiosity, that suggested she wasn't intimidated by my attitude or put off by my obvious lack of enthusiasm for being there. "Good afternoon," she said to the class once we had all settled into our seats. "I'm Mrs. Rodriguez, and I'm excited to spend this year exploring the power of words with all of you." Her voice was clear and warm, with just a trace of an accent that suggested she understood something about bridging different worlds, about the challenges of navigating between languages and cultures. And she didn't speak louder than necessary or use the artificially cheerful tone that some teachers employed when they were trying too hard to be liked. She simply spoke as if she genuinely believed that what we were about to do together was important and interesting. "This year," she continued, "we're going to discover that words have the power to change lives, your lives, the lives of people you'll never meet, and maybe even the world itself. And we're going to learn that stories matter, that every person has important stories to tell, and that the ability to express ourselves clearly and powerfully is one of the most valuable skills any of us can develop." I remember sitting in the back row, trying to maintain my air of indifference while feeling inexplicably drawn to the confidence and warmth in her voice. Most teachers began the year by listing rules and consequences, by establishing their authority and making clear the boundaries that students were not supposed to cross. Empezó. Rodriguez was talking about possibility and power, as if she believed that we, a room full of kids from struggling families in a neglected neighborhood, actually had something important to contribute to the world. "I know," she said, walking slowly around the room and making eye contact with each of us, "that some of you are wondering why English class matters, why learning to write well should be important to you, why anyone should care about literature and poetry and the kinds of academic exercises that can feel disconnected from your real lives." She paused near my desk, and for just a moment, her eyes met mine with that same combination of warmth and curiosity that I had noticed when I first entered the room. And it wasn't a challenging look or a suspicious one. It was simply the look of someone who was genuinely interested in what I might be thinking and feeling. Someone who believed that my thoughts and feelings were worth knowing about. "But I'm here to tell you," she continued, moving back toward the front of the classroom, "that learning to express yourself clearly and powerfully is the key to every dream you might have, every goal you want to achieve, every wrong you want to right, and every change you want to make in your community or in the world." She sat on the edge of her desk in a way that was both casual and attentive, as if she were having a conversation with friends rather than lecturing to students. "When you can write clearly, you can communicate your ideas to people who have power and influence. When you can tell your story effectively, You can help others understand experiences they've never had themselves. When you can argue persuasively, you can advocate for changes that matter to you and your family. I found myself listening despite my determination to remain disengaged. There was something about the way she spoke, not down to us, but directly to us, as if she believed we were capable of understanding and appreciating complex ideas. That was completely different from what I was used to experiencing in school. This year, she said, I want each of you to discover your own voice as a writer, to find the stories that only you can tell, and to develop the skills that will allow you to share those stories with the world in ways that are clear, powerful, and impossible to ignore. She stood up and moved to the blackboard, where she wrote in clear and precise handwriting. Every person has a story worth telling. Every voice matters. Every dream deserves to be expressed. Then she turned back to face us, and her expression was both serious and encouraging. My job this year is not to give you my ideas about what good writing looks like, but to help you discover what good writing looks like when it comes from your unique perspective, your particular experiences, and your individual way of seeing the world. And I remember feeling a strange combination of skepticism and curiosity. And the skeptical part of me, the part that had learned not to trust adult promises about caring and opportunity, wondered if this was just another version of the false encouragement that teachers sometimes offered before revealing their real expectations and limitations. But there was another part of me, a part I had almost forgotten existed, that was intrigued by the possibility that my thoughts and experiences might actually be worth expressing, that the stories I carried inside me might be interesting to someone else, that there might be value in learning to communicate more effectively than I currently could. And during that first class, Ms. Rodriguez had us do a simple writing exercise, and she asked us to write for 15 minutes about a place that was important to us, not necessarily a famous place or a beautiful place, but a place that had meaning in our lives, a place that we could describe in a way that would help someone else understand why it mattered. I stared at the blank piece of paper for several minutes, my automatic resistance warring with a growing curiosity about what I might actually write if I allowed myself to take the assignment seriously. I was accustomed to giving minimal effort to schoolwork, to producing the bare minimum required to avoid getting in trouble, to approaching academic tasks with the assumption that they were meaningless exercises designed to keep us busy rather than genuine opportunities for learning or expression. But something about Mrs. Rodriguez's tone, about the way she had spoken about the power of words and the importance of individual voices, made me wonder what might happen if I actually tried to describe the small corner of our apartment building's courtyard, where I sometimes sat in the evenings when home felt too small and the neighborhood felt too dangerous. It was just a tiny patch of concrete with a few struggling plants that Mrs. Hernandez from apartment 2B tried to keep alive despite the lack of adequate sunlight and the harsh urban environment. There was a broken bench that someone had tried to repair with duct tape, and during certain times of the day, you could sit there and catch a glimpse of sky between the buildings. I had never thought of this little space as important or meaningful. It was just where I went when I needed to think or when the tension at home became overwhelming. But as I began to write about it, I found myself describing not just the physical details, but the feelings I experienced there. The sense of being suspended between the chaos of home and the dangers of the street. The way the late afternoon lights sometimes created brief moments of beauty even in our gritty surroundings. The hope I felt when I watched Mrs. Hernandez tenderly watering her struggling plants. And when the 15 minutes were up, I was surprised to discover that I had filled the entire page and was in the middle of a sentence. Even more surprising was the realization that I had been completely absorbed in the writing. That for those 15 minutes, I had forgotten about my usual defensive posture and had simply focused on trying to capture something true about my experience. Mrs. Rodriguez collected our papers, but instead of simply taking them away to grade them in isolation, she asked if anyone would be willing to share what they had written. Several hands went up, mostly from the students who always volunteered for everything, but then she did something that no teacher had ever done before. She looked directly at me and said, "Joe, I noticed you were really concentrated on your writing. Would you be willing to share a sentence or two about the place you described?" My first instinct was to refuse, to retreat back into the safety of silence and disengagement. But there was something in her tone, not demanding or pressuring, but genuinely curious, that made me hesitate. And she wasn't asking me to perform or to impress anyone. She seemed actually interested in what I had written, as if she believed that my perspective might be worth hearing. "I wrote about the courtyard behind our apartment building," I said, my voice barely above a mumble. "It's not much, but sometimes when I sit there in the evening, I can see a little bit of sky between the buildings, and it makes me feel like there might be more to the world than just our neighborhood." The classroom was quiet for a moment. Not the restless, impatient quiet that usually meant kids were bored, but a thoughtful quiet that suggested people were actually listening. Then Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, not the bright, artificial smile that adults sometimes used when they were trying to encourage children, but a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "That's beautiful, Joe," she said. "You've captured something really important about finding hope and beauty in unexpected places. That's exactly the kind of authentic observation that makes writing powerful and meaningful." I felt something shift inside me at that moment. Some small crack in the defensive wall I had built around myself. For the first time in my academic experience, a teacher had responded to something I had created with genuine appreciation rather than correction, with interest rather than judgment, with recognition that I had succeeded at expressing something true rather than criticism about what I had failed to do correctly. And it was a small moment, probably lasting no more than 30 seconds, but it planted a seed that would grow over the months and years that followed. For the first time, I had experienced what it felt like to be seen not as a problem to be managed or a deficit to be corrected, but as a person with a unique perspective that might be worth sharing, a voice that might have something valuable to contribute to the world. As that first class ended and we gathered our things to leave, Mrs. Rodriguez handed back our papers. When she gave me mine, she had written a brief note at the bottom. "Joe, you have a real gift for observation and description. I hope you'll continue to explore this talent throughout the year. Your voice matters." I folded the paper carefully and put it in my notebook, trying to maintain my usual air of indifference while feeling something I hadn't experienced in a long time, a tiny spark of possibility. A small but persistent voice asking whether maybe, just maybe, I might be capable of more than I had previously believed. That first writing assignment became the beginning of a relationship with Mrs. Rodriguez that would transform not just my understanding of myself as a student, but my understanding of myself as a person with value, potential, and something meaningful to contribute to the world. Over the weeks that followed, Mrs. Rodriguez continued to create opportunities for me to discover that writing could be a powerful tool for exploring and expressing my thoughts and feelings. She gave us assignments that encouraged us to write about our own experiences rather than abstract topics that felt disconnected from our lives. And we wrote about our families, not in the superficial way that most school assignments approach the topic, but with depth and complexity that acknowledged the real challenges and complications that characterize most of our home situations. Mrs. Rodriguez created a classroom environment where it was safe to write honestly about financial struggles, language barriers, cultural conflicts, and the various pressures that we faced as young people trying to navigate between different worlds. When we wrote about our neighborhoods, not with the shame that many adults seem to expect us to feel about where we lived, but with the nuanced understanding that even struggling communities contain stories of resilience, hope, creativity, and strength that deserve to be told with accuracy and respect. We wrote about our dreams and fears, our observations about injustice and inequality, our ideas about how things could be different and better. Mrs. Rodriguez treated our thoughts and perspectives with the same seriousness that I imagined college professors brought to the ideas of their adult students. But perhaps most importantly, She taught us that good writing wasn't about using fancy vocabulary or complex sentence structures to impress readers. Good writing was about clarity, the honesty, and the courage to express our authentic selves in ways that helped others understand experiences they might never have themselves. The best writers, she told us one day, are not necessarily the ones with the biggest vocabularies or the most sophisticated techniques. The best writers are the ones who can help us see the world through their eyes, who can make us feel what they feel, who can share their truth in ways that expand our understanding of what it means to be human. See, she introduced us to authors who wrote about experiences similar to our own, writers who had grown up in poverty, writers who had navigated cultural and linguistic challenges, writers who had found ways to transform their struggles into stories that educated, inspired, and advocated for change. We read Sandra Cisneros, whose House on Mango Street showed us that stories about growing up in urban Latino communities could be literature worthy of serious attention. We read excerpts from the work of writers like Richard Rodriguez, who explored the complexities of being caught between different worlds, and Maya Angelou, who demonstrated how personal narrative could become a powerful force for social change. But Mrs. Rodriguez didn't just have us read these authors, she helped us understand how their techniques and approaches could inform our own writing. She showed us how Cisneros used simple, clear language to capture complex emotions and situations, how Rodriguez balanced personal storytelling with broader social analysis, how Angelou transformed painful experiences into narratives that offered hope and wisdom to others facing similar challenges. And most importantly, she consistently reinforced the message that our own experiences and perspectives were just as valid and valuable as those of the published authors we studied. She never suggested that we should try to copy someone else's style or voice, but rather that we should learn from their examples while developing our own unique ways of expressing ourselves. As the weeks passed, I found myself looking forward to English class in a way that surprised me. For the first time in my academic experience, school felt like a place where I could explore ideas that mattered to me, where my thoughts and feelings were treated with respect, where I was encouraged to think critically about the world around me, rather than simply memorize information that seemed irrelevant to my life. My writing began to improve. Not because Mrs. Rodriguez was constantly correcting my grammar and spelling, though she certainly helped me develop those technical skills, but because she had given me reasons to care about communicating effectively. When you have something important to say and you believe that people might actually listen, you naturally want to say it as clearly and powerfully as possible. But the changes weren't limited to my performance in English class. The sense of possibility that Mrs. Rodriguez had awakened began to influence my attitude toward other subjects and toward school in general. I started to wonder whether the intellectual curiosity she had encouraged in her classroom might be applicable to history, science, and even mathematics. But more importantly, I began to reconsider my assumption that academic success was for other people, that someone with my background and circumstances should set lower expectations for themselves. Shelia Rodriguez's consistent message that my voice mattered and that my perspective was valuable began to chip away at the limiting beliefs I had developed about my own potential. This shift in perspective didn't happen overnight, and it certainly wasn't without setbacks. I still struggled with anger and frustration when I felt overwhelmed by the various pressures in my life. I still sometimes retreated into defensive silence when other adults approached me with what I perceived as judgment or condescension. But increasingly, I had an alternative to the narrative that I was doomed to be a troublemaker, doomed to fail academically, doomed to repeat the struggles that characterized my family's experience in America. Rodriguez had shown me glimpses of a different story about who I might become, and those glimpses were becoming harder and harder to ignore. The turning point came in November, about 2 months into the school year. Mrs. Rodriguez had assigned us to write a personal narrative about a time when we had learned something important about ourselves or the world. She emphasized that the story didn't have to be about a dramatic or life-changing event. Sometimes the most powerful insights came from ordinary moments that we took the time to examine carefully. I decided to write about a Saturday morning when I had accompanied my father to one of his construction jobs. He was working on a house in a wealthy neighborhood, and I had been struck by the contrast between the beautiful homes he was helping to build and the tiny apartment where our family lived. But as I worked on the essay, I found myself exploring not just the obvious observations about economic inequality, but also more complex feelings about my father's work. His dignity in the face of circumstances that would have broken many people, and my own growing understanding of the different ways that value and worth could be measured. I wrote about watching him carefully lay tiles with an attention to detail that transformed functional work into something approaching art, about the pride he took in doing any job well regardless of how others might view that work, about the realization that his character and integrity were not diminished by his economic circumstances. I wrote about my initial shame at the contrast between where we lived and where he worked, and about my gradual understanding that shame was the wrong response, that my father was contributing something valuable to the world, that his work mattered, that the temporary nature of our economic situation didn't define our family's worth or potential. And when I finished the essay, I knew it was the best thing I had ever written. It was honest without being self-pitying, complex without being confusing, and personal without being too private. I had managed to capture something true about my experience and my growing understanding of the world, and I felt proud of what I had accomplished. Rodriguez's response exceeded even my hopeful expectations. She asked if she could read my essay aloud to the class, not as an example of perfect writing, but as an example of powerful writing. Writing that demonstrated how personal experience could be transformed into insight that resonated with others. When she finished reading, the classroom was completely quiet, and then one of my classmates, Maria, raised her hand and said, "That made me think about my mom's work differently. She cleans offices downtown, and sometimes I feel embarrassed about it. But Joe's right, she's doing something important, and she does it really well." Other students shared similar responses, talking about how my essay had helped them reconsider their own feelings about their family's work, their economic circumstances, and the various forms that dignity and worth could take. Mr. Rodriguez smiled and said, "This is exactly what powerful writing does. It helps us understand our own experiences more clearly, and it helps others see the world from a different perspective. Joe has given us all a gift by sharing his honest observations and insights." But then she did something that changed everything. She looked directly at me and said, "Joe, you have a real talent for this kind of writing. Your voice is authentic and powerful, and you have something important to say about the world. Have you ever thought about the possibility that writing might be more than just a school assignment for you? Have you ever considered that this might be something you could pursue seriously?" The question hit me like a physical blow, and in all my 12 years, no adult had ever suggested that I might have a talent worth developing, that I might be capable of achieving something significant, that my future might contain possibilities I had never considered. "I don't know what you mean, Ian," I said, my voice barely audible. "I mean that," she said gently, "that you have the potential to be a real writer, someone who uses words to educate, inspire, and create change in the world. You have a unique perspective, a clear voice, and the courage to explore difficult topics with honesty and insight. And those are the qualities that real writers possess." No, she paused, allowing her words to sink in. "I'm not saying this would be easy, or that you wouldn't have to work very hard to develop your skills, but I am saying that you have the foundation, the natural ability, that could lead to something really significant if you choose to pursue it." I stared at her, trying to process what she was telling me. The possibility she was suggesting was so removed from any future I had imagined for myself that I could barely comprehend it. Writers were people who went to college, people whose families had money and connections, people who lived in a different world from the one I inhabited. "But I'm from the barrio," I said finally. "Writers aren't people like me." Madame Rodriguez's expression became very serious. "Joe, that's exactly wrong. Writers are people like you, people who have seen things that others haven't seen, people who understand struggles that others don't understand, people who can share experiences that the world needs to hear about. Oh, she moved closer to my desk, speaking more quietly so that her words were meant primarily for me. The world doesn't need another writer who grew up privileged and comfortable. The world needs writers who can tell the stories of people whose voices aren't usually heard, who can help readers understand what life is like for families like yours, who can advocate for change and justice through the power of their words. She straightened up and addressed the entire class again. Every person in this room has stories that the world needs to hear. Every person here has a perspective that could help others understand important truths about what it means to be human. Bond is to help you develop the skills to share those stories effectively. But her eyes returned to me as she continued. Well, some of you may discover that writing becomes a hobby that enriches your life. Others may find that writing helps you in whatever career you choose to pursue. And some of you may discover that writing is your calling, your way of making a meaningful contribution to the world. When class ended that day, Rodriguez asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once the other students had left, she sat down at the desk next to mine, a gesture that made our conversation feel more like a discussion between equals than a typical teacher-student interaction. "Joe," she said, "I want you to know that I don't say things like that lightly. When I told you that you have the potential to be a real writer, I meant it completely. I've been teaching for 12 years, and I've learned to recognize genuine talent when I see it." And she pulled out my essay and pointed to specific passages. "Look at this paragraph where you describe watching your father work. And you've managed to capture not just what you saw, but what it meant to you. And you've done it in a way that helps readers feel what you felt. That's not an accident, and it's not something that can be taught. It's a gift." I read the paragraph she had indicated, trying to see it through her eyes, trying to understand what she saw that I didn't see myself. "But more than that," she continued, "you're willing to explore complex ideas and difficult emotions, and you're not afraid to examine your own assumptions and feelings. Even when that examination is uncomfortable, that kind of intellectual courage is essential for any writer who wants to create work that matters." She leaned forward slightly, her expression intense but encouraging. "I want to make you an offer. I'd like you to stay after school one day a week, let's say Wednesdays, so we can work together on developing your writing skills. And we'll focus on techniques that will help you express your ideas even more effectively, and we'll explore different forms of writing that might interest you." My first reaction was panic. The idea of additional time at school, of making myself even more visible to adult attention, triggered all my defensive instincts. "I don't know," I said. "I have to help my family after school, and I don't want to get behind in my other classes." "I understand," she said quickly, "and I'm not suggesting that you neglect your family responsibilities or your other academic work. This would be in addition to everything else you're already doing well, not instead of it." She was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider how to address my concerns. "Let me ask you this. Do you enjoy writing? When you're working on an essay like the one you wrote about your father, do you feel engaged and interested in what you're doing?" I had to admit that I did. The writing assignments in her class had become something I looked forward to, something that felt meaningful rather than just another academic requirement. Hey. "And do you feel like you have more stories to tell, more ideas to explore, more things you'd like to say if you had the skills to say them effectively?" Again, I had to acknowledge that she was right. The writing I had been doing in her class had awakened something in me, a desire to explore and express ideas that I had never really articulated before, even to myself. "Then I think it would be worth trying," she said gently. "We could start with just 1 month and see how it goes. If it feels like too much pressure or if it's interfering with your other responsibilities, we can discontinue. But if you find that it's helpful and enjoyable, we could continue for the rest of the year." She reached into her desk and pulled out a small notebook. "I'd like you to have this," she said, handing it to me. "I want you to start carrying it with you and writing down observations, ideas, overheard conversations, interesting details that you notice, anything that strikes you as potentially worth exploring in your writing. The notebook was simple but new, with a bright blue cover and lined pages that were completely blank, waiting for whatever I might choose to put there. It was the first new notebook I had ever owned that wasn't a hand-me-down or a school requirement. The most important thing any writer can develop, she said, is the habit of paying attention. Great writing comes from noticing things that others might overlook, from seeing the extraordinary in the ordinary, from recognizing the stories that are all around us, but that we often take for granted. I held the notebook carefully, feeling its weight and possibilities. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Why do you care whether I become a better writer?" Mrs. Rodriguez smiled, and for a moment she looked almost bound. "Because I believe that everyone deserves to have at least one person who sees their potential and believes in their ability to achieve something meaningful. And because I know from experience that sometimes it only takes one person believing in you to change the entire trajectory of your life." She was quiet for a moment, and then she continued. "But also because I believe that you have stories to tell that the world needs to hear. Your perspective, your experiences, in your way of seeing the world, these things matter. The world is a better place when people like you have the skills and confidence to share your voice." When I agreed to try the Wednesday afternoon sessions, though I insisted that it would only be for a month and that I would stop if it became too much pressure or if it interfered with my family responsibilities. That first Wednesday afternoon in Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom became the beginning of an educational experience unlike anything I had previously encountered. Instead of focusing on grammar rules and essay formats, we talked about the writers I admired and what made their work powerful and engaging. She introduced me to authors I had never heard of, people like Gary Soto, who wrote about growing up Chicano in California, and Luis Rodriguez, no relation, whose memoir, Always Running, explored the realities of gang life and the possibilities of transformation through education and writing. But she also showed me how classic authors like Mark Twain and Charles Dickens were doing many of the same things that contemporary authors were doing, using their personal experiences and observations to create stories that entertained readers while also commenting on social issues and human nature. "Every great writer," she told me, "is essentially doing the same thing. They're saying, 'Let me show you the world as I see it. And maybe through my eyes, you'll understand something new about your own experience or about the experience of people different from yourself.'" She taught me practical techniques for improving my writing, how to use specific details to make descriptions more vivid, how to structure paragraphs so that ideas flowed logically from one to the next, how to choose words that conveyed not just meaning, but also emotion and tone. But more importantly, she taught me to think of myself as someone who had something valuable to contribute to the ongoing conversation that literature represented. She helped me understand that writing wasn't just about completing assignments or demonstrating academic skills. It was about participating in a tradition of human beings using language to share their deepest observations about what it meant to be alive. The Wednesday afternoon sessions continued far beyond the original one-month trial period. By December, they had become the highlight of my week, the time when I felt most engaged and most like the person I was capable of becoming. Mrs. Rodriguez challenged me to try different forms of writing, poetry that captured moments of beauty or insight in concentrated language, short stories that explored the complexities of relationships and decision-making, essays that examined social issues from my unique perspective. Each form taught me different skills and revealed different aspects of my own voice and interests. When I discovered that I had a particular talent for personal narrative, the kind of writing that used my own experiences as a starting point for exploring larger themes and ideas. My grades in other subjects began to improve as well. The critical thinking skills I was developing in our writing sessions, the confidence I was gaining in my ability to express complex ideas, and the general sense of intellectual curiosity that Mrs. Rodriguez had awakened all influenced my approach to history, science, and even mathematics. But perhaps more importantly, I began to see myself differently. Instead of thinking of myself as someone who was destined to struggle academically and socially, I started to believe that I might be capable of achieving things that had previously seemed impossible. And the notebook Mrs. Rodriguez had given me became a constant companion. I filled it with observations about the people and situations I encountered, snippets of conversation that revealed something interesting about human nature, descriptions of places and moments that struck me as beautiful or meaningful despite their apparent ordinariness. The habit of paying attention that she had encouraged began to change how I experienced the world. And instead of moving through my days in a defensive, reactive mode, I started to approach my experiences with curiosity and openness, began to see stories everywhere, in the relationships between my neighbors, in the dynamics of my family, in the small dramas that played out in school hallways and neighborhood corners. By the spring of 7th grade, I was writing regularly outside of school assignments, not because anyone required it, but because I had discovered that writing helped me understand my own thoughts and feelings more clearly. The notebook had become a place where I could explore questions and ideas that I wasn't ready to discuss with other people, where I could work through complicated emotions and observations at my own pace. But Ms. Rodriguez had also introduced me to the school newspaper, where I began contributing short articles about school events and student concerns. It was my first experience of writing for an audience beyond my teacher and classmates, and I discovered the satisfaction of knowing that my words might influence how others thought about important issues. But the most significant development came in May, near the end of the school year. Ms. Rodriguez approached me about entering a citywide writing contest for middle school students. The contest invited students to submit essays about a person who made a difference in your community. "I think you should write about your father," she suggested. "You've shown such insight into his character and his contributions to your family and community. I think you could write something that would help judges understand the dignity and value of his work, and the strength it takes to maintain hope and determination in the face of significant challenges." Well, the idea terrified me. Writing for Mrs. Rodriguez and even for the school newspaper felt safe because those audiences knew me and understood my background. Writing for a citywide contest meant putting my thoughts and experiences in front of people who might judge me or my family, who might not understand or appreciate the perspectives I had to offer. But Mrs. Rodriguez's confidence in my abilities had become a powerful force in my life. Over the months we had worked together, she had consistently demonstrated her belief that I had something valuable to say and the skills to say it effectively. Her faith in my potential had begun to override my own doubts and fears, and I spent weeks working on the essay, crafting and recrafting each paragraph until I felt that I had captured not just the facts about my father's life and work, but the deeper truths about his character, his resilience, and his quiet heroism in the face of circumstances that could easily have defeated a person with less strength and dignity. Rodriguez worked with me through multiple drafts, helping me develop my ideas and refine my expression, while being careful never to impose her own voice or perspectives on my work. When she asked questions that helped me think more deeply about what I was trying to say, suggested techniques that made my writing more powerful and engaging, and consistently reinforced her belief that I was creating something special. And when I finally submitted the essay, I felt proud of what I had accomplished, but tried not to think too much about the possibility of winning. The contest included students from across the entire city, many of them from schools with far better resources and reputations than Lincoln Middle School. But Mrs. Rodriguez had taught me that the real value of the writing lay not in winning recognition, but in the process of exploring my own thoughts and experiences, in the satisfaction of expressing something true and meaningful, and in the possibility that my words might help others understand perspectives they hadn't previously considered. 3 weeks later, Ms. Rodriguez asked me to stay after class with an expression on her face that I couldn't interpret. When the other students had left, she was holding an envelope with my name on it. "This came to the school office today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's from the contest organizers." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope and read the letter inside. I had to read it twice before the words fully registered. I had won first place in the middle school division of the citywide writing contest. Mrs. Rodriguez was watching my face carefully as I processed the news. When I looked up at her, she was smiling more broadly than I had ever seen her smile. "Congratulations, Joe," she said. "You've accomplished something really significant. But more than that, you've proven to yourself that your voice matters, that your perspective has value, and that you have the skills to share your insights with the world." The prize included a small scholarship for high school, but more importantly to me at the time, it included an invitation to read my essay at an awards ceremony that would be attended by teachers, parents, and city officials. For the first time in my life, I would have the opportunity to speak to an audience of adults who were gathered specifically to hear what young people had to say. The awards ceremony was held on a Saturday evening in June at the downtown library. Ms. Rodriguez accompanied me with my parents, who had taken time off from work and borrowed clothes appropriate for the occasion. When my name was called and I walked to the podium to read my essay about my father, I looked out at an audience of adults who were listening respectfully and attentively to words I had written. And for a few minutes, I was not a troubled kid from the barrio who might or might not make it through high school. I was a writer whose perspective on important questions was valued enough to deserve a formal hearing. When I finished reading, the audience applauded warmly, and several people approached me afterward to comment on how moved they had been by my description of my father's work and character. But the most meaningful response came from my father himself, who told me in Spanish that he was proud of me, not just for winning the contest, but for understanding and appreciating things about his life that he had never expected anyone to notice or value. Rodriguez stood beside us during these conversations, clearly proud but not taking credit for what I had accomplished. She had simply provided the guidance, encouragement, and opportunities that allowed me to discover and develop abilities I hadn't known I possessed. As 7th grade ended and I prepared to move on to 8th grade, Mrs. Rodriguez and I talked about how to maintain the writing habits and continue developing the skills I had begun to acquire. And she recommended books for me to read over the summer, suggested topics that might be worth exploring in future writing, and made me promise to keep using the notebooks she had given me. But most importantly, she helped me understand that what we had accomplished together was not an end, but a beginning, when the confidence I had gained, the skills I had developed, and the sense of possibility I had discovered would influence everything that followed. Not just my academic performance, but my understanding of my own potential and my place in the world. "You have a gift, Joe," she told me on the last day of school. "But gifts are only valuable if they're developed and shared. You have the foundation now. The rest is up to you." Both the grade presented new challenges and opportunities. I was placed in advanced English classes and encouraged to take more challenging courses in other subjects as well. The confidence I had gained in Mrs. Rodriguez's class influenced my approach to all my academic work, and my grades reflected this increased engagement and effort. Continued writing regularly, both for school assignments and for my own satisfaction, was the habit of observation and reflection that Mrs. Rodriguez had encouraged became a natural part of how I approached my daily experiences. I wrote about the changes in my neighborhood, the challenges my family faced as we tried to navigate American systems and institutions, and the growing sense of possibility I felt about my own future. During 8th grade, I also began to understand more clearly how Mrs. Rodriguez's influence had extended beyond my writing skills to my fundamental understanding of myself and my potential. And she had taught me that intelligence and talent could take many forms, that academic success was available to students from any background, and that the perspectives I had developed through my particular experiences were valuable rather than limiting. But perhaps most importantly, she had demonstrated through her consistent faith in my abilities that adults could be trusted to see and nurture the best in young people rather than simply managing their problems or controlling their behavior. Her example became the foundation for my ability to form positive relationships with other teachers and mentors throughout high school and beyond. As I progressed through high school, The writing skills I had developed in Mrs. Rodriguez's class continued to serve me well. I wrote for the school newspaper, contributed to literary magazines, and eventually became editor of the yearbook. And each of these experiences built on the foundation she had provided, reinforcing my understanding of the power of written communication and my confidence in my ability to use that power effectively. And the scholarship I had won in the middle school writing contest, combined with my improved academic performance and the recommendation letters from teachers who had come to know and respect my work, made it possible for me to apply for additional scholarships for college. For the first time, higher education began to seem like a realistic possibility rather than an impossible dream. Throughout high school, I maintained occasional contact with Mrs. Rodriguez. I would stop by her classroom to update her on my progress, share articles I had written, and seek her advice about important decisions. She always greeted me with the same warmth and interest she had shown during our Wednesday afternoon sessions. And she consistently reinforced her belief that I was capable of achieving whatever goals I set for myself. When I graduated from high school as valedictorian and received a full scholarship to UCLA, Mrs. Rodriguez was one of the first people I wanted to share the news with. Her joy at my success was genuine and heartfelt, but she was also careful to remind me that the scholarship was a recognition of work I had done and potential I had demonstrated. She had simply helped me see and develop what was already there. Change presented new challenges and opportunities. And for the first time, I was in an environment where my background and perspectives were valued rather than seen as limitations. I majored in English with a focus on creative writing, and I discovered that the skills Mrs. Rodriguez had helped me develop in 7th grade provided a solid foundation for the more advanced work I was now expected to produce. I wrote for the college newspaper, contributed to literary magazines, and eventually had some of my work published in small journals and magazines. And each publication felt like a validation of Ms. Rodriguez's early assessment of my potential, and each success reminded me of how profoundly her belief in me had changed the trajectory of my life. During my junior year of college, I decided to write my senior thesis about the educational experiences of Latino students in urban schools. The project gave me an opportunity to examine more systematically the kinds of challenges I had faced and to explore the factors that made the difference between academic success and failure for students from backgrounds similar to my own. As part of my research, I interviewed several teachers who worked in schools like Lincoln Middle School, trying to understand what motivated them to continue working in difficult conditions and what strategies they found most effective for reaching students who might be struggling academically or socially. The interviews reinforced my understanding of how exceptional Mrs. Rodriguez had been, and not just in her skills as a teacher, but in her ability to see potential in students whom others might have written off as lost causes. Each of the teachers I spoke with were dedicated and caring, but few possessed her particular combination of high expectations, unwavering belief in student potential, and practical skills for nurturing talent and building confidence graduating from college. I taught high school English for several years while continuing to write in my spare time. Teaching gave me a deeper appreciation for what Mrs. Rodriguez had accomplished with me and with countless other students over the years. I discovered how challenging it was to reach students who were struggling academically or socially, how much patience and creativity was required to help young people discover their own potential, and how rewarding it could be when those efforts succeeded. And during my teaching years, I tried to model my approach on what I had learned from Mrs. Rodriguez. I looked for ways to connect academic skills to students' real interests and concerns. I worked to create classroom environments where all voices were valued and respected, and I tried to help each student discover their unique strengths and talents. I also continued writing, and eventually some of my work began to attract attention from publishers and literary agents. The combination of my teaching experience and my growing reputation as a writer led to opportunities to speak at conferences and workshops about education, writing, and the experiences of Latino students in American schools. Throughout this period, I maintained contact with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become something like a mentor and friend. She followed my career with interest and pride, and she often asked me to speak to her current students about the possibilities that education and writing could open up for them. And these visits to her classroom were always meaningful experiences for me. They provided opportunities to share with young people who were facing challenges similar to those I had faced. And they reminded me of how transformative it could be when adults believed in students' potential and provided them with the tools and encouragement to pursue their dreams. But they also reminded me of how much I owed to Mrs. Rodriguez's early intervention in my life. Without her recognition of my potential, her willingness to invest extra time and attention in my development, and her consistent faith in my ability to succeed, it was entirely possible that I would have continued down the path of academic disengagement and eventual failure that had seemed inevitable when I first walked into her classroom. In my late 20s, I began working on what would become my first published book, and it was a memoir that explored my experiences growing up in East LA, the challenges my family had faced, and the various factors that had made it possible for me to overcome the obstacles that prevented many of my peers from achieving academic and professional success. The book was deeply personal, but I tried to write it in a way that would be accessible and meaningful to readers who hadn't shared my particular experiences. I wanted to help others understand what life was like for immigrant families trying to establish themselves in America, what urban schools were like from a student's perspective, and how individual teachers could make profound differences in students' lives. Rodriguez featured prominently in the book, not just as a character in my story, but as an example of how powerful it could be when educators saw their role not just as conveying information, but as recognizing and nurturing human potential. I wrote about our Wednesday afternoon sessions, about the notebook she had given me, about the writing contest that had been my first taste of external recognition, and about the countless ways her influence had shaped my understanding of myself and my possibilities. By writing about Mrs. Rodriguez forced me to articulate more clearly what had made her approach so effective and so transformative. It wasn't just that she was kind or encouraging, though she certainly was both of those things. It was that she had possessed the combination of high expectations and practical support that allowed students to exceed their own assumptions about what they were capable of achieving. And she had seen potential in me before I saw it in myself. But she had also provided the guidance and opportunities necessary for that potential to be developed into actual skills and accomplishments. And she had believed in me, but she had also taught me to believe in myself through experiences of genuine success and meaningful achievement. When the book was finally published, it received positive reviews and found an audience among educators, parents, and people interested in stories about overcoming adversity through education and personal determination. But for me, the most meaningful aspect of the publication was the opportunity it provided to publicly acknowledge the debt I owed to Mrs. Rodriguez and to demonstrate how profoundly a teacher's faith in a student could influence not just academic outcomes, but entire life trajectories. I sent one of the first copies off the press, along with a letter expressing my gratitude for everything she had done for me and my hope that the book would help others understand the kind of difference that dedicated teachers could make in students' lives. Her response was characteristically generous and humble, and she wrote that she was proud of what I had accomplished, but wanted me to remember that the success was mine. She had simply provided encouragement and opportunities for me to discover and develop talents that were already there. But she also wrote that reading about our work together had reminded her of why she had become a teacher in the first place, and that the book would help her explain to colleagues and administrators why the kind of individual attention and creative support she provided to students was worth the extra time and effort it required. And the dedication page of the book read simply, "For Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, who saw a writer before there was any evidence that one existed." But the book's success led to opportunities for me to speak at education conferences, teacher workshops, and university classes about the factors that contribute to student success and the role that individual relationships can play in helping young people overcome challenging circumstances. And during these presentations, I always emphasize Mrs. Rodriguez's example as an illustration of how powerful it could be when teachers approach their work with the assumption that every student possessed unique talents and perspectives worth discovering and developing. It talked about the specific techniques she had used, connecting academic skills to students' real interests and experiences, providing individual attention and support, creating opportunities for meaningful success, and consistently communicating her belief in students' potential. But I also emphasized the broader philosophy that had guided her approach. The understanding that education at its best was not about fitting students into predetermined molds, but about helping each individual discover their own unique strengths and interests and develop the skills necessary to pursue their goals effectively. And these presentations were often attended by teachers who were struggling with similar challenges to those Mrs. Rodriguez had faced large classes, limited resources, students from difficult circumstances, and institutional pressures that sometimes conflicted with their desire to provide individualized attention and support. Many of them approached me after my talks to share their own stories about students they were trying to reach, challenges they were facing in their efforts to provide meaningful education, and successes they had achieved when they were able to implement approaches similar to those Mrs. Rodriguez had used with me. And these conversations reinforced my understanding of how exceptional Mrs. Rodriguez had been, but they also demonstrated that her methods and philosophy could be adapted and applied by other dedicated educators who were willing to invest the time and creative energy required to truly reach their students. Over the years following the publication of my first book, I continued writing and teaching, always carrying with me the lessons I had learned from Mrs. Rodriguez about the power of believing in people's potential and providing them with the tools and opportunities to develop their talents. I wrote several more books, taught at the university level, and continued speaking about education and the experiences of Latino students in American schools. Each of these activities felt like an extension of the work Mrs. Rodriguez had begun with me in that 7th grade classroom, work aimed at helping people discover their potential and develop the skills necessary to achieve their goals. But perhaps the most meaningful continuation of her influence came through my own teaching. Whether I was working with high school students, college students, or adults in community education programs, I tried to approach each learner with the same combination of high expectations and supportive guidance that Ms. Rodriguez had provided for me. I looked for ways to connect academic skills to students' real interests and concerns, worked to create environments where all voices were valued and respected, and tried to help each person discover their unique strengths and talents. And in many cases, I was able to see students make the same kind of transformative progress that I had made under Mrs. Rodriguez's guidance. Some of these students went on to achieve academic and professional success that exceeded their own expectations and those of their families and communities. Others made more modest but equally meaningful progress in developing their skills and confidence. Yet in all cases, I tried to remember Mrs. Rodriguez's example of seeing potential in every student and providing whatever support was necessary to help that potential be realized. During my 40s, as I became more established in my career and more financially secure, I began looking for ways to give back to the community where I had grown up and to support the kind of educational programs that had made such a difference in my own life. I established a scholarship fund for Latino students from East LA who showed potential in writing and literature, modeled on the same principles that had guided Mrs. Rodriguez's work with me, the belief that talent and potential existed in every community, and that what was often lacking was not ability, but opportunity and support. I also began volunteering at Lincoln Middle School, where Mrs. Rodriguez was still teaching, providing writing workshops and mentoring individual students who showed interest and ability in creative expression. These experiences allowed me to work directly with young people who were facing circumstances similar to those I had faced, and to provide the kind of encouragement and practical support that Mrs. Rodriguez had given me. And working with these students reinforced my understanding of how powerful it could be when adults believed in young people's potential and provided them with concrete opportunities to develop their talents. I saw students who had been written off by other adults blossom when they were given genuine attention and support. And I saw young people who had never thought of themselves as capable students develop confidence and skills when they were provided with appropriate challenges and encouragement. But I also saw how easy it was for talented students to be overlooked or underestimated, particularly when they came from backgrounds that differed from mainstream expectations about what academic potential looked like. Many of the students I worked with possessed the same kinds of insights, creativity, and determination that Mrs. Rodriguez had recognized in me, but they needed someone to help them see those qualities in themselves and develop them into academic and creative achievements. As I approached my 50th birthday, I began working on what would become my most ambitious book project, a comprehensive examination of educational practices that successfully served Latino students and other young people from challenging circumstances. The project involved extensive research, including interviews with successful students, effective teachers, innovative administrators, and families who had navigated the education system effectively despite facing significant obstacles. Mrs. Rodriguez, now nearing retirement, was one of my primary interview subjects. Talking with her about her career, her philosophy, and her methods gave me new insights into what had made her so effective and so influential in the lives of her students. She'd emphasized that successful teaching required more than good intentions or even strong subject matter knowledge. And it required the ability to see each student as an individual with unique strengths, interests, and challenges, and the creativity to find ways to connect academic skills to students' real concerns and aspirations. She talked about the importance of high expectations combined with practical support, the need to create classroom environments where all voices were valued and respected, and the power of helping students discover their own potential through experiences of genuine success and meaningful achievement. But perhaps most importantly, she emphasized the need for teachers to approach their work with humility and genuine curiosity about their students' experiences and perspectives. She had learned as much from her students over the years as she had taught them, and this reciprocal relationship had been essential to her effectiveness as an educator. The book that emerged from this research was well received and became required reading in many teacher education programs. But for me, the most meaningful aspect of the project was the opportunity it provided to document and share Mrs. Rodriguez's wisdom and to demonstrate how her approaches could be adapted and applied in a variety of educational settings. And when Mrs. Rodriguez retired after 35 years of teaching, the school district organized a celebration that brought together hundreds of former students, colleagues, and community members whose lives she had touched over the decades. I was invited to speak at the ceremony, and I used the opportunity to talk about what Mrs. Rodriguez had meant to me personally and what her example could teach all of us about the power of education to transform lives and communities. I talked about the notebook she had given me, which I still carried and used regularly, and about how the habits of observation and reflection she had encouraged had influenced every aspect of my career and personal development. And I talked about the writing contest that had been my first taste of external recognition, and how that experience had taught me that my voice and perspective were valuable and worth sharing with the world. But mostly I talked about the gift of being seen and believed in by someone who had no obligation to invest extra time and attention in my development, but who had chosen to do so because she believed that every student deserved the opportunity to discover and develop their potential. The ceremony was emotional for everyone involved, but it was particularly meaningful for me because it provided an opportunity to publicly acknowledge the debt I owed to Mrs. Rodriguez and to celebrate the countless ways her influence had rippled outward to affect not just her direct students, but the students we had gone on to teach and the communities we had gone on to serve. And after her retirement, Mrs. Rodriguez and I maintained our friendship, and she continued to be interested in my work and supportive of my efforts to carry forward the kinds of educational approaches she had pioneered. She read everything I published, attended my speaking engagements when possible, and continued to offer advice and encouragement as I navigated the challenges of my career and personal life. In my late 50s, as I began to think about my own retirement and legacy, I realized that much of what I had accomplished could be traced back to that Wednesday afternoon session when Mrs. Rodriguez had first suggested that I might have the potential to be a real writer, her willingness to see possibility where others saw only problems, her commitment to providing the support and opportunities necessary for that possibility to be realized, and her consistent faith in my ability to succeed had literally changed the trajectory of my life. But more than that, her example had taught me how to approach other people, students, colleagues, family members, community members, with the same combination of high expectations and practical support that she had provided for me. And she had shown me that believing in someone's potential was not enough. You also had to be willing to invest the time and energy necessary to help that potential be developed into actual skills and accomplishments. She had demonstrated that effective mentoring required not just encouragement, but practical guidance, not just high expectations, but concrete opportunities for meaningful success. As I reflect now on more than 5 decades of life that followed my 7th grade year in Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom, I am struck by how consistently the lessons I learned from her have influenced my approach to every challenge and opportunity I have encountered. The confidence she helped me develop in my ability to express myself clearly and persuasively has served me well in every aspect of my career, from teaching to writing to public speaking to advocacy work. The habit of careful observation and thoughtful reflection that she encouraged has enriched my understanding of the world and provided the foundation for most of the insights I have been able to share through my writing and teaching. And the understanding she gave me of the power of individual relationships to transform lives has guided my approach to mentoring and supporting others throughout my career. But perhaps most importantly, the example she provided of how to see potential in unexpected places and invest in the development of that potential has become central to how I try to approach all my relationships and responsibilities. And when Mrs. Rodriguez passed away 5 years ago, I was asked to speak at her memorial service, standing before a packed church filled with former students, colleagues, family members, and community leaders whose lives she had touched. I tried to capture something of what she had meant to all of us and what her legacy could teach future generations of educators and community members. Talked about the thousands of students she had taught over 35 years and how many of them had gone on to achieve things they never would have thought possible without her influence and support. I talked about the ripple effects of her work, the students she had taught who had become teachers themselves, the writers she had encouraged who had gone on to create work that inspired and educated others, the community leaders she had nurtured who had worked to create opportunities for future generations. But mostly I talked about the philosophy that had guided her work and that could guide all of us in our efforts to make positive differences in the world. The belief that every person possesses unique talents and perspectives worth discovering and developing, and the commitment to providing whatever support is necessary to help those talents be realized. Her influence continues to shape my work and perspective today. More than 50 years after I first walked into her classroom as an angry, defensive 12-year-old who had never imagined that someone might see potential in him that he couldn't see in himself. The notebook she gave me sits on my desk as I write these words, worn and refilled many times over the years, but still serving the same purpose she originally intended, helping me pay attention to the world around me and capture the observations and insights that form the foundation of meaningful writing. The confidence she helped me develop in my ability to express myself effectively continues to influence how I approach every writing project, every speaking engagement, every conversation where I hope to share ideas that might be helpful or meaningful to others. The understanding she gave me of the power of individual relationships to transform lives continues to guide my approach to teaching, mentoring, and community engagement. But perhaps most importantly, the example she provided of how to see the best in people and invest in the development of their potential has become central to how I try to approach all my relationships and responsibilities. For those of you who may be educators yourselves, who work with young people in any capacity, or who have opportunities to influence and support others in your communities, I hope Mrs. Rodriguez's example will serve as both inspiration and practical guidance. The gift of believing in someone's potential, of providing the support and opportunities necessary for that potential to be realized, of refusing to give up on people when others have written them off. These are gifts that any of us can offer, regardless of our formal roles or professional responsibilities. The techniques that made Mrs. Rodriguez so effective, connecting academic skills to students' real interests and concerns, providing individual attention and support, creating opportunities for meaningful success, communicating consistent belief in people's potential. These are approaches that can be adapted to any setting where one person has the opportunity to influence and support another. Most importantly, the philosophy that guided her work, the understanding that every person possesses unique talents and perspectives worth discovering and developing, is a perspective that can transform how we approach all our relationships and interactions with others. Your belief in someone's potential, your willingness to invest time and attention in their development, your refusal to accept limitations that others might impose. These things can literally change the trajectory of a life, just as Mrs. Rodriguez's belief in me changed mine. For those of you who may be students yourselves, or who are supporting young people in your families or communities who are struggling academically or socially, I hope this story will serve as a reminder that potential can be discovered and developed at any stage, that individual relationships can make profound differences, and that the support and encouragement of even one person who believes in you can open up possibilities you never imagined. Your voice matters. Your perspective is valuable. Your potential is real. Even if others haven't recognized it yet, or if you haven't fully recognized it yourself, the habits of observation and reflection that Mrs. Rodriguez encouraged me to develop are available to anyone willing to pay attention to the world around them and to take seriously their own thoughts and experiences as sources of insight and understanding. The confidence that comes from genuine achievement and meaningful recognition can be developed through practice and support. Even if you haven't experienced much success in traditional academic settings, most importantly, the understanding that your experiences and perspectives are valuable and worth sharing is something that can transform not just your academic performance, but your entire approach to life and relationships. For those of you who may be parents or grandparents, trying to support young people in your families who are facing challenges in school or in life, I hope Mrs. Rodriguez's example will provide guidance about how to be most helpful and encouraging. The combination of high expectations and practical support that characterized her approach is something that can be adapted to family relationships as well as classroom settings. The importance of seeing each young person as an individual with unique strengths, interests, and challenges rather than comparing them to siblings or peers or external standards is a perspective that can transform family dynamics and communication. But the power of providing concrete opportunities for meaningful success and genuine recognition is something that families can create through their attention to young people's interests and accomplishments. Most importantly, the commitment to believing in young people's potential even when they don't believe in themselves, even when their current performance doesn't reflect their true abilities, even when others have given up on them. This is perhaps the most valuable gift that any family member can offer. As I approach my own retirement and continue to reflect on the various influences that have shaped my life and career, I am struck by how often the most transformative experiences have involved someone seeing potential in me that I didn't see in myself and providing the support necessary for that potential to be developed. Mrs. Rodriguez was the first and perhaps most influential of these mentors, but she was not the last throughout my life. I have been fortunate to encounter teachers, colleagues, friends, and family members who have believed in my abilities and invested in my development in ways that have made profound differences in what I have been able to accomplish. Each of these relationships has reinforced the lessons I first learned from Mrs. Rodriguez about the power of individual relationships to transform lives, the importance of seeing potential in unexpected places, and the responsibility we all have to support and encourage others in their efforts to discover and develop their talents. But these relationships have also taught me that the gift of being believed in and supported carries with it the obligation to extend that same belief and support to others, and the confidence, the skills, and opportunities that others have helped me develop are not just for my own benefit. They are tools that enable me to contribute to the development of others in turn. This understanding has guided my approach to teaching, or to writing, and mentoring, and community engagement throughout my career. In every context where I have had the opportunity to influence and support others, I have tried to remember Mrs. Rodriguez's example of how to see the best in people and provide the encouragement and practical support necessary for their potential to be realized. And sometimes this has meant working with students who reminded me of myself at 12, angry, defensive young people from challenging circumstances who had learned not to trust adult promises about caring and opportunity, but who possessed tremendous potential when someone took the time to see and nurture it. Sometimes it has meant working with colleagues who were struggling with professional challenges or personal difficulties and who needed someone to believe in their abilities and help them remember their own strengths and potential. Sometimes it has meant working with community members who had important stories to tell or valuable perspectives to share, but who lacked the confidence or skills to express themselves effectively in public forums. In every case, I have tried to apply the lessons I learned from Mrs. Rodriguez about how to approach people with genuine curiosity and respect, how to provide support that builds rather than undermines confidence, and how to create opportunities for meaningful success and recognition. And the results have been as varied as the individuals involved. But in many cases, I have had the privilege of seeing people achieve things they never thought possible, develop confidence and skills that transform their self-perception and their relationships with others, and go on to provide similar support and encouragement to others in turn. And these experiences have reinforced my understanding of how powerful it can be when we approach our relationships and responsibilities with the assumption that every person possesses unique talents and perspectives worth discovering and developing. They have also demonstrated that the techniques and approaches that Mrs. Rodriguez used so effectively can be adapted to a wide variety of settings and relationships, from formal educational environments to informal community interactions. But perhaps most importantly, they have shown me that the kind of transformative influence Mrs. Rodriguez had on my life is not limited to particularly gifted or specially trained individuals. It is available to anyone who is willing to see potential in others and invest the time and attention necessary to help that potential be realized. As I consider the legacy I hope to leave through my own work and relationships, I am guided by the example Mrs. Rodriguez set of how to make a meaningful difference in the world through attention to individual relationships and commitment to helping others discover and develop their potential. The books I've written, the students I have taught, the community programs I have supported, all of these activities have been motivated by the same philosophy that guided Mrs. Rodriguez's work, the belief that every person has valuable contributions to make to the world, and that our responsibility is to help them develop the confidence and skills necessary to make those contributions effectively. But I also hope that my legacy will include the influence I have had on others who have gone on to apply similar approaches in their own work and relationships. Just as Mrs. Rodriguez's influence extended far beyond her direct students to affect the communities we have served and the students we have taught. I hope that the lessons I have learned from her example will continue to ripple outward through the work of others long after my own active career has ended. The notebook Mrs. Rodriguez gave me more than 50 years ago has become a symbol of the ongoing nature of learning, observation, and growth. Just as it has been filled and refilled many times over the years, while continuing to serve its original purpose, the lessons I learned from her have been applied and reapplied in countless different contexts while maintaining their essential value and relevance. The confidence she helped me develop in my own voice and perspective has evolved and deepened over the decades, but it continues to provide the foundation for my ability to contribute meaningfully to conversations about education, literature, and community development. The habits of careful observation and thoughtful reflection that she encouraged have become central to how I approach every aspect of my life, from my writing and teaching to my relationships with family and friends to my engagement with community issues and social concerns. The understanding she gave me of the power of individual relationships to transform lives has guided my approach to every mentoring opportunity, every teaching assignment, every chance to support and encourage others in their efforts to achieve their goals. But perhaps most importantly, the example she provided of how to approach other people with genuine curiosity and respect, how to see potential in unexpected places, and how to invest in the development of that potential has become central to my understanding of what it means to live a meaningful and purposeful life. And for those of you who are now in the later stages of your own lives and careers, reflecting on the influences that have shaped your development and considering the legacy you hope to leave through your relationships and contributions, I hope Mrs. Rodriguez's example will provide both inspiration and practical guidance. The opportunity to make a transformative difference in someone else's life is not limited to formal educational or professional settings. It is available in every relationship, every interaction, every chance encounter where we have the opportunity to see potential in another person and offer support for its development. The techniques that made Mrs. Rodriguez so effective: genuine attention to individual strengths and interests, high expectations combined with practical support, creation of opportunities for meaningful success, consistent communication of belief in people's potential. These are approaches that can be applied in family relationships, community involvement, and volunteer work, and countless other contexts where we interact with others. Most importantly, the philosophy that guided her work, the understanding that every person possesses unique talents and perspectives worth discovering and developing, is a perspective that can enrich and transform any life, regardless of age or circumstances. And your experiences, your insights, your accumulated wisdom are valuable resources that can benefit others, particularly younger people who are still in the process of discovering their own potential and developing their capabilities. Your willingness to believe in others when they don't yet believe in themselves, to provide encouragement and support during difficult periods, to share the lessons you have learned through your own challenges and successes. These are gifts that can make profound differences in other people's lives. Your example of how to approach life with curiosity, resilience, and commitment to growth and service can inspire others to adopt similar approaches in their own lives and relationships. The legacy of Mrs. Rodriguez's influence continues to expand through the work of her former students. The approaches we have adopted in our own teaching and mentoring, and the values we have passed on to our children and communities. In the same way, your own influence and legacy can extend far beyond what you might imagine, touching lives and inspiring changes that ripple outward through generations of people whose development you have supported and encouraged. The notebook Mrs. Rodriguez gave me has traveled with me through elementary school graduation, high school commencement, college degrees, career changes and geographic moves, family celebrations, and personal challenges. And it has been my constant companion through more than 5 decades of learning, growing, and trying to make meaningful contributions to the world. But it has also served as a daily reminder of the transformative power of someone believing in your potential before you believe in it yourself, of the importance of paying attention to the world around you, and of the responsibility that comes with being given opportunities to develop and share your talents. Today, as I continue to write and teach and work with young people who remind me of myself at 12, I carry with me the lessons Mrs. Rodriguez taught me about seeing potential in unexpected places, about providing the support and encouragement necessary for that potential to be realized, and about the profound differences that individual relationships can make in people's lives. Her influence has shaped not just my career, but my understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life, a life dedicated to discovering and developing your own potential while helping others discover and develop theirs. A life committed to using whatever talents and opportunities you have been given to make positive contributions to your community and the world. The 12-year-old boy who walked into her classroom angry, defensive and convinced that he had nothing to offer the world grew into a man whose voice has been heard by thousands of readers, whose teaching has influenced hundreds of students, and whose advocacy has contributed to improved educational opportunities for young people from backgrounds similar to his own. But more than any external achievements or recognition, the greatest gift Mrs. Rodriguez gave me was the understanding that I mattered, that my thoughts and feelings and perspectives were valuable, that my potential was real and worth developing, and that I had contributions to make it to the world that no one else could make in quite the same way. This understanding has sustained me through every challenge and disappointment I have faced, has motivated me through every opportunity for growth and service I have encountered, and has guided me in my efforts to provide the same gift of belief and support to others that she provided to me. As I conclude this reflection on Mrs. Rodriguez's influence and legacy, I am filled with gratitude for the countless ways her faith in my potential changed the trajectory of my life, and with hope that sharing her story might inspire others to approach their own relationships and responsibilities with the same combination of vision, commitment, and love that made her such an extraordinary teacher and human being. The world is full of young people who need someone to believe in them before they believe in themselves, who need someone to see their potential even when their current circumstances or performance might suggest otherwise, who needs someone to provide the support and opportunities necessary for their talents to be discovered and developed. The world is also full of adults who have the capacity to provide that belief and support, who possess the wisdom and experience that could benefit others, who have opportunities every day to make positive differences in other people's lives through their attention, encouragement, and investment in human potential. Rodriguez's example reminds us that we don't need special training or formal roles to transform lives. We need only the willingness to see the best in others, the commitment to invest in their development, and the patience to support them through the sometimes slow process of discovering and developing their unique talents and abilities. And the notebook she gave me still sits on my desk, a tangible reminder of the power of one person's belief to change everything. But the real legacy of her influence lives in the countless ways that belief has been passed forward to my students, my readers, my children, my community, creating ripples of possibility that extend far beyond what any of us could have imagined when I first walked into her 7th grade classroom more than 50 years ago. Your potential to create similar ripples of positive influence is real and waiting to be realized. Your opportunities to make meaningful differences in other people's lives are present in every relationship, every interaction, every chance to see and nurture the best in those around you. The dance continues. My friends, the music is still playing. There are still notebooks to be given, potential to be recognized, and lives to be transformed through the simple but profound act of believing in each other and investing in the development of the unique gifts that each person brings to the world. Rodriguez saw a writer before there was any evidence that one existed. In doing so, she taught me that the most important education we can receive or give has nothing to do with textbooks and everything to do with learning to see ourselves and others clearly, to believe in human potential even when it's not yet fully visible, and to commit ourselves to helping that potential be realized in all its beautiful, surprising, and transformative power. The story continues to be written, one life at a time, one relationship at a time, one moment of recognition and belief at a time. And in that continuing story, each of us has the opportunity to be both student and teacher, both recipient and giver of the kind of transformative influence that changes everything. The influence of someone who sees what we could become and refuses to give up on helping us become it.